Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is misspeaks and the mistakes that public personalities and politicians make when they speak. These mistakes are often both embarrassing and insulting at the same time. No one has a monopoly on spouting ridiculous and absurd statements. I think that's one thing on which everyone can agree. It's true for everyone, and even more so for people in public eye, people whose every word is reported and every gesture is reviewed, and often ridiculed. People like comedian Whoopi Goldberg and Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene make it very clear that that's the case. They make history. And because they both succumbed to the ridiculous and made comments that are only born out of ignorance, they will both be visiting Holocaust educational facilities. Whoopi Goldberg's comments have been discussed at length. Some might even say ad nauseum, and need no further comment, except to say, and this is important, that when Karen Johnson changed her name to Whoopi Goldberg, that's right, Karen Johnson to Whoopi Goldberg, it was carefully chosen and deliberate. She knew she was picking a Jewish name, and that part of her humor routine would now contain the line, "What, I don't look Jewish?" She chose a Jewish name because it was funny, and because of Jewish audiences, and because she knew it was all that much more and important for her. Goldberg was not a white name. Goldberg was a Jewish name. When she changed her name, Jews were not mainstream. They were not white. Jews like Goldberg and comedians like Johnson were part of the media, but they were not part of America's waspy world. Jews were outsiders. She traded on one outsider stereotype for another. And Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene did exactly the same thing. Congresswoman proved once again that despite being correct on some important issues, she is shockingly uneducated on so many others. Being in the position of power while having large gaps in overall education is a dangerous combination. It's like drinking and driving. That's how dangerous it is. If somehow you have not yet heard, this is what Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor recently said.
Not only do we have the D.C. jail, which is the D.C. gulag, but now we have Nancy Pelosi's gazpacho police spying on members of Congress, spying on the legislative work that we do, spying on our staff, and spying on American citizens that want to come talk to their representatives.
Did you catch it? If it were just a misspeak, it would just be funny. But it wasn't just a misspeak. It's still funny, but it's also sad and alarming. For the sake of humor, soups could become the theme for malaprops of this ilk. Gazpacho, Gestapo. For anyone who hasn't read the word Gestapo, it would be difficult to confuse the two. Taylor could have made it worse. She could have said goulash instead of gulag, or confuse Vichy Soir with Vichy France. Okay? She could have done that. One of the reasons Sheridan's 1775 great play, The Rivals, was so funny is because one of the central characters, Mrs. Malaprop, made such misspeaks. They are also called acrologia, or Dagobert-isms. Acrologia derives from actually the Latin and the Greek, which means a misspoken word. Dogberry is like Mrs. Malaprop, was a fictional character in the play. His character appeared in Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing. People make mistakes all the time. Some can be very funny, but nevertheless, they tend to typecast the person into someone who simply does not know the language or does not know history. When Michael Tyson lost the world heavyweight title to Lennox Lewis, he was asked what's next. He answered, "I might fade into Bolivian." Tony Abbott, the Australian Prime Minister from 2013 to 2015, he made the same mistake several times, at least twice. His remark was, "No one is the suppository of wisdom." And later he said, "the vast suppository of wisdom." Making this even further wrong and ridiculous is that the person he was speaking about, and he apologized for the Prime Minister's misspeak by calling it a missmarpolism. The suppository of wisdom confused Mrs. Malaprop with the hero of crime novels of Agatha Christie, Miss Marple. Former Texas governor, presidential candidate Rick Perry used malaprops often also, but the way children do. He called them lavatories of innovation and democracy. Again, we all make mistakes, but some people are expected to know more. In the past, I've mentioned President Biden confusing the 67 Six-Day War with the 73 Yom Kippur War. If someone else made this mistake around the dinner table, someone would correct them and the conversation would go on. But some people, like presidents and prime ministers and elected officials, are supposed to know better. If they don't, they need to be corrected. It's as simple as that. There are many reasons we make these kinds of mistakes. One has to do with exposure to foreign languages. Unlike Europeans, few Americans have exposure to multiple other languages. As a result, the foreign sounds blend together, even when they are so different and come from very different languages, like gazpacho, which is Spanish, and Gestapo, which is German. When I was very young growing up, there were many languages that swirled around me. I did not always know which word was in which language. I remember my total shock when I discovered that the word spatula was not a Yiddish word at all. It sounded so very Yiddish. About the same time, when my brother would prod me and provoke me, my parents taught me the word ignore. Instead of saying ignore, I would run around saying annoy, 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 annoy. I was correct, he was annoying me, but to my parents' chagrin, I could not ignore it. I expect that Marjorie Taylor will be spending much more time in the National Holocaust Museum in D.C. At least, I hope so. Coming up next, Points of View. First up is a column from the Jerusalem Post, and it is penned by Stuart Weiss. It was published on February 10th, 2022. It's entitled, How Can a Jew Be Too Jewish? Opinion subtitled, Word of my stubborn insistence on standing with our ally Israel had now circulated widely within the State Department, writes former Ambassador David Friedman. This column is a thought piece stimulated by the new autobiography of former U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman. Weiss raises some very important points. His premise is that being a proud Jew is an essential character of Jewish leadership, and most everyone who is active and involved in the Jewish community. This is how Weiss begins. Former U.S. Ambassador David Friedman is a Jewish hero by any definition of the word. He unabashedly fought for Israel throughout his tenure, often against the pro-Arab bias that has characterized the American State Department since Israel's founding. Friedman, a longtime friend and confidant of former U.S. President Donald Trump, painstakingly presented Israel's case to the president and had a profound influence over his decisions. It was Friedman who explained the importance of officially declaring Jerusalem as Israel's capital, a move that had been supported throughout the terms of Republican and Democratic chief executives alike, yet never acted upon. It was Friedman who advocated finally standing up to the Palestinian Authority and demanding that they rein in acts of terror and cease rewarding their people for murdering Jews. Their failure to do so resulted in both the closure of the Palestinian embassy in Washington and the loss of significant U.S. funding. And it was Friedman who had a central role, along with Jared Kushner, in formulating and implementing the Abraham Accords with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, a most significant Middle East diplomatic achievement since the peace treaty with Egypt. And so it is not completely astonishing that Friedman was rudely warned by a State Department official not to be so Jewish. His new book, Sledgehammer, How Breaking with the Past Brought Peace to the Middle East, is set to be released this week. In it, as Breitbart reveals, Friedman reports an exchange he had with the official in 2017, just before Trump's visit to Jerusalem, where, at Friedman's urging, Trump visited the Western Wall, the first sitting U.S. president to do so. Word of my stubborn insistence on standing with our ally Israel had now circulated widely within the State Department, writes Friedman. A senior staffer decided to call me and offer the following advice. Mr. Ambassador, don't be so Jewish. What? I said. Don't be so Jewish. You represent the United States of America. Tone down your Judaism in your work. Don't be so Jewish. I was furious. Do you think I'm under any delusion as to who I represent? Said Friedman. Just a free word of advice, the official retorted. Worth the price, said Friedman. Weiss proceeds to offer more examples of how Jewish leaders wear their Jewishness with pride. He writes, so, is there such a thing as being too Jewish? Interestingly, just last month, President Isaac Herzog paid an official visit to the UAE. Close observers will have noted that Herzog was visibly unshaven at the time, as he was sporting his shloshim, literally 30 beard, reflecting the halachic prohibition from shaving for the month following the death of a close relative. Herzog's mother, Ora, had passed away on January 9th. Our president, whose illustrious grandfather was the first chief rabbi of the State of Israel, was neither embarrassed nor ashamed to maintain his tradition, even in the presence of kings and sheikhs. This noble gesture, taken by one of our leaders, is something to be proud of, a clear message that we neither apologize nor compromise our values and mores when facing the world at large. I recall the famous picture of President Yitzhak Rabin and the Pope with the tongue-in-cheek caption, Rabin meets the Pope is the one in the yarmulke. But Rabin, like Herzog, was never afraid to state his opinion or defend Israel's point of view in foreign forums. Weiss understands the dangers of being a proud Jew today, where attacks against Jews, Jewish Jews specifically, happen regularly. But his point is still very important, and he concludes with an important caveat. He explains the need for proud Jews to be good role models, dignified and proper. This is based on the rabbinic idea, he doesn't go into it, but I'll explain it here, called morit ayin. The rabbinic directive speaks to the obligation to behave properly because observers see your actions and will conclude that this behavior is acceptable. Weiss concludes this way. One further note, while we always must maintain a high moral code of behavior, when we do identify openly as Jews, we must be doubly careful to act in a dignified manner. For better or for worse, Jews and Israel are judged collectively through the prism of individual incidents. We are always on display and are perceived as walking and talking ambassadors of our faith. That is why we have a uniquely Jewish concept called Chilul Hashem and Kiddush Hashem. All of our actions serve to either glorify the greatness of God in this world or diminish Him. So let us be aware of the tremendous influence we firstborn of the Almighty have on humanity and the great responsibility that comes along with it. And whenever possible, let us opt for Jewish pride rather than Jewish hide. This is an excellent piece by Stuart Weiss. Thank you. Next up is a column from a New Jersey radio station.
New Jersey 101.5.
MJ 101.5. The column is called New Jersey Woman Refuses Emergency First Aid Care, Saying No Jews. It is authored by Judy Franco and is published on February 10th, 2022. This story is a scary story, and after hearing it, you will both be amused and stunned. Judy Franco begins. With the large Orthodox Jewish population in Lakewood, it's no news to anybody that every once in a while the ugly seeds of anti-Semitism are going to be sown. Lakewood is no stranger to anti-Semitic incidents, but then again, we've all seen a resurgence of anti-Semitic incidents all over this country. Now, there's your basic casual garden variety hate, and then there's real hate. The kind that runs through the very blood in your veins. The kind that cannot be eradicated. You must be very committed to hatred of Jews, to actually refuse help from them when you call for emergency medical care. But the Lakewood Scoop is reporting that that's exactly what happened in a case in Lakewood where Jewish first aid volunteers showed up to assist a woman in need. According to the report, the woman refused to be helped by these volunteers saying, "Not with you guys, no Jews." And boy, she was angry. She must have been angrier than physically hurt. The report describes the tantrum that ensued when these volunteers then called for backup, and lo and behold, an ambulance from Robert Wood Johnson showed up with 2 EMTs who were also, you can't make this up, also Jewish. Franco now asks the reader the logical question that must be going through the mind of the Jew hater who clearly needs help. And the question is, now what do you do? You've painted yourself into a corner here. It sounds like the woman made a commitment that she definitely couldn't back out of. So, What are you to do? Just lie there until a non-Jew shows up? The report doesn't explain exactly why or how the woman relented, but she eventually was transported to the hospital by Jews. I'm wondering if any Jewish doctors showed up to treat whatever the medical condition it was. Would she refuse that too? Or at that point, with no other options, would she eventually give in? Franco was correct to bring this to our attention. While it is funny, it's also very sad that the level of hate and disdain that people have for the Jew has risen so very high of late. Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. I want to show you 5 cartoons and memes today. The first meme is simply brilliant and so insightful. The author explains that, quote, "Some friends exercise every day. Meanwhile, I'm watching a show I don't like because the remote fell on the floor." This next is a tweet about the iconic radio and talk show host Larry King. The tweet reads, "He considered himself an agnostic, but was a Jew in his kishkas. So, though he didn't eat kosher, he never ate milk and meat together. He didn't observe the Jewish holidays, but couldn't but feel reverence on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And when Chabad Rabbi, my dear brother-in-law, Rabbi Yitzi Horowitz, who unfortunately has ALS, asked people to celebrate his birthday by putting on tefillin, Larry did just that and sent him a picture. Label Zeiger, aka Larry King, is now interviewing the angels. He was 87. Powerful. Next up is a hilarious pun on our world of COVID and the grasp of common knowledge that our younger generation possesses. Fill in the blanks to the question, who killed Goliath? Blank blank VID. The child answers, COVID. This next meme is funny. English is being transformed before our very eyes, and the parent had a quick response to her child's flippant remark. The meme reads, "Today my daughter called me birth person. I replied, yes, financial drain. That's funny." Finally, for those who love The Wizard of Oz, there is a TV meteorologist delivering the weather report. There is clearly a tornado watch in the area. We see a pair of legs, and on the feet are the glistening ruby slippers, and the caption reads, "When there's a tornado watch, but you're ready." That's wonderful. Good use of The Wizard of Oz. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. The Arab Gulf states have lost their patience with Lebanon and with the terrorist organization Hezbollah, an Iran-sponsored terrorist organization which exerts tremendous power in Lebanon. Kuwait has delivered a list of expectations to Lebanon. The list was probably approved by the Saudis and by the UAE. Included in the list is taking back national control of Lebanon. That means control over Hezbollah. It includes increased security in Lebanon. The Gulf states also expect a curbing of sale of drugs to Gulf states. And they want a commitment that elections will take place as scheduled in May. In response, the leader of Hezbollah, Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, said, "Lebanon is a sovereign country and should not be sent dictates." Once again, Iran is continuing to sow turmoil in the Middle East. The head of the Iranian Navy said on Bushehr TV that the Saudi royal family is Jewish. That's right. He said they're Jewish. This is not a compliment. It was an insult and a theological attack. He was saying that the conflict between Iran and the Saudis goes back to the 7th century, to the battles between the first Muslims and the Jewish tribes in Arabia. General Al-Riza Taghsiri, commander of the Iranian Navy, said, and I'm quoting here, "We cannot bear to see injustice in a Muslim country that is perpetrated by the Zionists and the seed of the Jews," unquote. In a clear reference to the assassination by the United States of Qasem Soleimani, the former commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, the Al-Quds Brigade, he said, "We cannot bear to see the Muslims who are being slaughtered by people who call themselves Christians but are not." And in a clear reference to the Saudis, General Taghsiri said, "These are the same Jews, and I'd better say Zionist, whose hearts are never aligned with Islam and even with the Prophet in his time. He continued, the grudge that enemies harbored towards Soleimani resembles the grudge towards Imam Hussein in Karbala. This is a reference to the battle which Ali, the son-in-law of Muhammad, was brutally killed. Ali was the first Imam of the Shia Muslims. And to the battle in which he was killed, which became a formative event of Shiite Islam. This tirade was a direct attack against the Saudis and a call to all Shiites to understand that the Sunni Saudis are enemies, just like Israel. Israel is taking part in the Pfizer medical trial. That should not come as a surprise to anyone. They are participating in the testing of a COVID shot developed for Omicron. The trials take place at Sheba Medical Center in Tel Aviv. Israelis who have not received their fourth shot are eligible to take part in the study. Pfizer and Israel have developed a very good relationship during COVID. Israel was the perfect partner for Pfizer because of the nature of their medical system, which is, on the one hand, developed and sophisticated, but on the other hand, is also a socialist system. Israel's medical system is also very well organized, with the national health data feeding into a central computer system, and the system allows almost immediate reporting on the status of illness, shots, as well as the demographics and locations of outbreaks. This relationship between Pfizer and Israel and its medical system will certainly continue even as we hope COVID finally recedes. Once again, Hamas issued a warning to Israel. If Israel continues to clash with Arabs in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood of Jerusalem, Hamas warns there will be a repeat of last year's mini-war with Gaza. According to the terror group, and I'm quoting here again, Israel will pay the price for its actions and attempts to expel the residents of Sheikh Jarrah. The resistance has threatened Israel in the past and has also faced the threat. The Guardian of the Wall campaign began from Jerusalem and spread to the West Bank and into Israeli cities. We will not hesitate to begin such a campaign again, unquote. This is not an empty threat, but it is not a totally realistic one either. There are many factors to be considered before a conflict with Gaza erupts. One part of the calculus is when and how Israel responds to attacks from Gaza. Another is how dramatic the rocket strikes are and how intensive those attacks are. Finally, there is the question of Israeli casualties. Israeli leadership will not stand idly by when Israelis are injured or killed by Gaza rockets. Cell phone hacking has become a big and all-consuming topic of interest and debate in Israel. Israeli technology has been utilized to hack phones across the world, even inside Israel. And also, to the chagrin, Israelis at home have been hacked a lot. In Israel, police are hacking, among others, numerous politicians and their families. And they did it without court orders, and they've been doing it for a while. In fact, it may have been evidence gathered from the former Prime Minister Netanyahu's son's cell phone that furthered the police investigation against his father. Kaspersky Labs, world-renowned hackers themselves, have given Israelis a quick set of tools to make certain that they are not hacked. This is how you prevent a hack. You restart your device daily, you delete unknown apps, you keep apps up to date, and do not click on anything unfamiliar. That's it, 4 steps. Also, iPhone users should cancel iMessage and FaceTime, and they should not use Safari or Google Chrome. If a hacker really wants you in, if they want you, they will get in. But this is advice that will help protect us and our cell phone from regular hackers and from computer hacking, that is, a general hacking. Things are changing fast, and it's a new era. For instance, cannabis, pot, marijuana, call it whatever you will, is now decriminalized in Israel. Justice Minister Gideon Sa'ar published a draft of the regulations making self-use of cannabis an administrative offense rather than a criminal offense. There are, however, some exceptions. The use of these substances by minors, soldiers, police, guards on duty are all exceptions. Fines for the use will be up to 1,000 Israeli shekel. This new status does not mean that it's legal. Rather, it means that it's not criminal. No trial, no prison. Smoking cannabis in Israel is now just like underage drinking, cigarette smoking, or speeding. Do not be surprised, but the Russian Navy held exercises in the Black Sea. 6 Russian Navy ships situated near Crimea. The announcement that this move was coming was made in January, and it happened in February. The original announcement was that the Russian Navy ships would engage in simultaneous exercises in Pacific to the Atlantic, and including even in the Mediterranean. But it's the Black Sea that is most worrisome. Ukraine is on the Black Sea, and that means that the Russians are on another Ukrainian flank. This is yet another move of intimidation by the Russians to Ukraine and by extension to the rest of the world. Not long ago, the United States sent ships into the Black Sea to check Russian activity. When the Russians responded, the United States turned and left the region. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. I spoke about misspeaks and misspeaks of leaders. How does one respond to comments that can only be termed idiotic comments? Over the years, I've concluded that the best response is through humor. Humor cuts right through the hatred and cuts through the ignorance. Jews have a very biting and critical sense of humor, especially about hatred and ignorance. As an example, here is a klezmer song written by Michael Winograd of New York, making fun of Marjorie Taylor Greene's Gestapo. The song is actually called the Gestapo Police. Gestapo Police. The music is very good. Listen and enjoy.
Not only do we have the D.C. jail, which is the D.C. gulag, but now we have Nancy Pelosi's Gestapo Police spying on members of Congress, spying on the legislative work that we do. Gazpacho.
Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.